Hello. No. So, a very good evening to you all. Welcome to Job Grade IS. Sunday was the break, and I hope you revised all the PYQs that I solved for you in this session, right? Uh, we will discuss many more PYQs, right? The aim of this discussion is to decode the pattern of UPSC. What kind of words they are using while asking the questions? What is the standard strategy required to excel in the answer writing, right? Now, what I've told you repeatedly, that answer writing is something which is the backbone of the UPSC mains examination. If you want to secure a very good rank, you need to focus on the answer writing. You need to focus on the answer writing. Now, why answer writing is so much important in mains examination? Because there is no other examination like the UPSC mains examination, right? And one more thing, within few days, we will try to solve more than one question in one single session, because the elaboration part I think is over. I have elaborated many more times how to write a mains answer, what are the sub points, what are the main points, what are the what are the points that you should keep in mind while writing the conclusion, while writing the body. Clear? Now, I have come up here with a very good question, and this is a question of modern Indian history that was asked in, I think, UPSC Civil Services 2022, and it's a 10 marker. On Saturday, we discussed a 15 marker question which had a word limit of 150 words. 150 words. Okay. Now, what is the plan? Now, what is the plan behind this question? Let me show you the question. Why did the armies of the British East India Company, mostly composed of Indian soldiers, win consistently against the more numerous and better equipped armies of the then Indian rulers? Give reasons. So, this is a very straightforward question. And what is the demand of the question? What is the demand of the question? Can anybody tell me what is the demand of the question? You are sitting in the mains examination, and at first instance, what you will understand? Straightforwardly, they are asking the reasons only. They are asking the reasons only. But as I told you, the more straightforward question, the more chances to get penalized by the evaluator, because they want you to be factually very correct and very calculated. Clear? They want you to be very estimated, very concise, because the word limit is 150 words. There can be numerous reasons. There can be numerous reasons behind the British superiority on their Indian counterparts, but they want a concise content in your answer. So, what can be the major reasons? What can be the major reasons behind the question that why British East India Company, which was mostly composed of Indian soldiers, win consistently, mark my word, consistently, against the more numerous and better equipped army of then Indian rulers? So, let us count one by one what you need to write in body? What you need to write in body? What you will write here? Will you define the East India Company or you will define the army of the East India Company? Choice is yours. Choice is yours. You want to define the East India Company or you want to, define the nature of the army of the East India Company that was maintained by the EIC. So, first of all, what you need to write about the army of East India Company, right? And this army of East India Company was maintained by two type of soldiers. Number one, the British soldier, and number two is the sepoys, the Indian soldiers, right? It had two components, two major components. British soldiers, and number two is Indian soldiers, which were popularly known as sepoys. Popularly known as sepoys. So, let me tell you the basic theory behind the question, that they are not, precisely asking about the Battle of Plassey and Battle of Buxar, because Battle of Plassey and Battle of Buxar were a complete fight between the Indian soldiers, which were maintained by the Nawab's army, and the British soldiers, which were employed under the East India Company. After the Battle of Plassey, Battle of Buxar, British employed a lot of Indians in the army of East India Company. Rudra, hello, good evening. Good evening, Rudra. Good evening, Rudra. So they employed a lot of soldiers into the East India Company. And what was the purpose? They wanted to use Indians against India. Why? Because it was not possible. To bring all the Europeans to all the European soldiers in India with the help of the navy and use them against the princely state. What British did? They employed Indians. They gave them better perks. They gave them better opportunities. Right? They gave them the better economical gains. And this was the reason why the number of Indian soldiers, the ratio of Indian soldiers was larger than the British soldiers, So these points are enough for the introduction. The introduction point. So what you'll write, the East India Company mixed British and Indian soldiers which helped it expanding the East India Company's domain and in getting victory over Indian princely states. Clear? It was able to consistently defeat much larger armies of the Indian rulers. The company was able to do so due to the ability to use a combination of strategic, organizational, technological and socio-political factor to its advantage. Why I have written this point? Because whenever you are going, if war fighting is an ecosystem, so what is the requirement of an army? First of all, it should be well organized. Combination of strategic, organizational, which means well organized. It must be technically superior than its enemies. And third is the socio-political factors. And this point is in context with India. Because when the British arrived in our country, especially when they started consolidation, their consolidation after the Battle of Plassey, after the Battle of Buxar, the socio-political condition of India was very weak. It was very fragile. Why? Because most of the princely states were, struggling for supremacy. For example, in 1761, Marathas were fighting in Atak. They were fighting in Panipat, sorry, in third battle of Panipat. And they didn't even think about a superior threat of British East India Company. They were thinking that Abdali was a bigger threat. But strategically, politically, Marathas proved wrong here. Marathas proved wrong here. So the socio-political condition of India was fragile. Another thing, Mughal Empire used to be the largest empire in the country, even in the later phase of the Mughal era. They were becoming weak day by day out, but they were enough strong to resist against the British. But British had the naval superiority. British had the naval superiority. Even British defeated the Portuguese in a naval war. Portuguese were a dominant naval power before the arrival of British. Before the arrival of British, they defeated the Portuguese. And due to the weak socio-political conditions of India, none of the Indian ruler even think about to establish a strong navy against the Europeans. Against the Europeans. Is it clear? Is it clear? So introduction is must be clear to you all. Next is the body portion. Next is the body portion. And the main heading is reasons behind the victory of East India Company. The first reason is superior weapons and technology. First reason is superior weapons and technology. Superior weapons and technology. Take the example of First Battle of Panipat of 1526. Babur defeated the Rajput army because of this artillery support. Artillery was the latest technology of 15th and 16th century. And he used the Tulagma system. Tulagma system you know very well. A cannon is placed between two wheels and it is rollable, right? But Indian rulers, when the British arrived, were relying on comparatively older technologies. Yes, they had the guns. Yes, they had the artillery. But there was one mistake. They didn't learn from their mistakes. Let me give an example of invasion of Nadir Shah. Invasion of Nadir Shah. Muhammad Shah Rangila was the ruler of Delhi. He was the ruler of Mughal dynasty. And Nadir Shah invaded and he defeated the Mughal army. He defeated the army of Nawab of Awadh and he defeated the army of Nawab of Hyderabad. It was the combined army. And it was a comprehensive defeat. Why? Because the Indian artillery was obsolete. And the artillery of Nadir Shah was lighter, detachable and smoother. And they got this swift firepower. They completely outgunned and outnumbered the Indian counterparts. Even after this, none of the Indian rulers learned the use of modern artillery. And now when British came in 1757 in the Battle of Plassey and 1764 in Battle of Buxar, let us take the example of Battle of Plassey in 1757. Nawab Siraj-ud-Daulah lost the war because of the treason of Mir Jafar. But the army of Nawab was bigger than the army of British East India Company. Nawab lost because of his obsolete artillery. And there was one more reason, that most of his artillery didn't fire because of Mir Jafar, because of the treason of Mir Jafar. Now, this battle did not decide anyone's superiority. Yes, Nawab was defeated and he was killed. But in 1764, the trio in the Battle of Buxar, Nawab Shujauddaulah, Mughal Emperor Shah Alam II, and Nawab Mir Qasim of Bengal, they gathered a larger army than the British. And British were technically superior. Their guns were faster, their artillery was lighter, and they completely outgunned and they completely, devastated the Trio's army. Right? So this point proved the importance of technology in the warfare of that time. Right? So British had the superior weapons and technology. Superior weapons and technology. Unlike the native rulers, the British East India Company access to better weapons and technology such as rifles and cannons, which allowed them to outgun the Indian rulers. They even used the best naval forces across the Indian coastal princely states, especially against the kingdom of Karnataka, kingdom of Mysore. They used their naval forces. Now, next is the naval supremacy. The naval supremacy. You know very well, even at this, naval supremacy is the most relevant point at present times. The country which has the naval supremacy rules the world. During World War II, British has had the strongest navy. Or till World War II, British had the strongest navy. Before the British, we had the Portuguese. They had the strongest navy and they ruled. They were destroyed by the advanced British Navy, and British started dominating over the seas, over the oceans. Now, in World War II, a naval conquest began between the Allied forces and the Axis forces. And by the end of World War II, and even today, the US Navy is dominating over the oceans. They are dominating over the oceans. So, you must know very well what is the importance of naval supremacy. Even now, China is one of the biggest threat for US naval supremacy. Their shipbuilding is much more rapid, especially when you compare them with our Indian counterparts. Right? So, naval supremacy is a very important point. Because of their command of the sea and naval power, British East India Company was able to swiftly move supplies. Right? They were very swift when it comes to the logistics, when it comes to the supply of ration, when it comes to the supply of ammunition, because they were maintaining a very strong navy. Strong navy means there was no resistance, no absolute resistance against the British, because Dutch were not interfering. They were limited to Java and Sumatra. Portuguese were completely destroyed by the British. Right? French were already defeated by the British in Anglo-French War. The fall of Napoleon Bonaparte proved their naval supremacy and the military superiority. So now there was no absolutely resistance for British when it comes to supply and the logistics through the naval route, right, which facilitated the reinforcement of their armies and beginning of strategic offensive. What is the meaning of reinforcement of the armies? When one column of the army is not able to capture anything, then another column of the army is being sent to enhance the capability of column 1, and that is known as the reinforcement, the additional forces. Reinforcement means the additional forces. So British used their reinforcement by the help of their navy, right, and they started the beginning of the strategic offensives. Okay, now strategic offensive. Next point is military training and discipline. I think this is the common point. That's why I have put this on priority number 3. But this is one of the most important point when it comes to the military conquest. British forces were much more disciplined. Why? Why they were much more disciplined? But because they were paid a regular salary. Their structure was better than their Indian princely states counterparts. Right? Now, they were much more disciplined. What is the meaning of discipline when it comes to the armed forces? When it comes to the armed forces, the modulus operandi of any of the armed forces is very, very simple. Even with the present Indian army, the more you bleed in, the more you sweat in peace, the less you bleed in war. And for that purpose, you need to train day in, day out. You need to train day in, day out. And for that purpose, you need to maintain a discipline. You need to maintain a discipline. You need to live in a war fighting ecosystem. You need to be ready always for war. Because at the time of bigger call, you cannot say, I'm not prepared. When you get the orders to throw the enemy out of your borders, you need proper preparation. And for that purpose, you need discipline. Discipline is required in each and every field, right? As far as UPSC is concerned, the discipline, the consistency is required to clear this examination. Let us suppose you have 3 months remaining for your prelims examination or mains examination, and if you are not disciplined, it doesn't matter how much talented you are, how much intelligent you are, you will not be able to qualify any of the stage of this services, right? And this point was applies same when it comes to the army. What was wrong with the army of the princely states? Were they not disciplined? Yes, they were disciplined, but they were not well structured. They were always ready during the wartime, but during peacetime, they used to do the farming work. Can you imagine that after Operation Sindoor, the most of the the offensive units of the Indian Army, such as the Special Forces and the Rashtriya Rifles, will do any kind of non-army work, any kind of civilian work, such as farming and all? No. The motive of any army is to fight, and fight to win. Most importantly, to fight to win. So here, the armies of the British East India Company were superior over the less structured and disciplined armies of the Indian rulers, because they were well trained. Yes, they were well trained. They were unified. They were unified. They were unified in the regiment. The phenomena of regiment is of British origin. British gave the phenomena of regiment, such as they raised Punjab regiment in India. They raised Madras Sappers in 1780. They raised the Rajputana Rifles, the oldest rifle regiment of the country, which has its command center at Delhi. Right? So, what was the purpose of British? To maintain certain regimental traditions. Punjab regiment may have the different tradition, Rajputana regiment may have a different tradition, but they have the single goal to defeat the enemy. Right? And this kind of structures their Indian counterparts lacked. Let us suppose the army of the princely state of Rajasthan. They were brave people, but they were not disciplined. They were not trained to fight against a common enemy, British. Sometimes they were fighting against, for their own regional supremacy, and sometimes they were fighting against, the internal rebellion of peasants and other things. Right? So they were not very well disciplined. And today you can see the structure of Indian Army. Indian Army, the modulus operandi of Indian Army is very, very simple: to protect the country from all kind of external threats. For armed rebellion, from any kind of internal insurgency, we have maintained a very strong paramilitary force such as BSF, CRPF, CISF, Assam Rifles, Sashastra Seema Bal. Right? We have maintained a lot of paramilitary forces, and to maintain the law and order, we have maintained a police. We have maintained a police. But in princely states, most of the princely states, one single force was doing multiple jobs. But in East India Company, they have maintained the regiments. They have maintained the regimental cultures, the regimental traditions, and with a single goal, that we have to defeat the enemy, be it French, be it Portuguese, be it any of Indian princely state. Clear? So the armies of British of East India Company, okay, and in addition, the East India Company maintained a permanent army while soldiers of Indian rulers worked in farms during the peacetime, which leads to irregularities, okay. Next is external support and good leadership. What kind of external support British always required? We have seen a lot of instances in the modern Indian history, that East India Company is fighting war, right? They are fighting war, and the British Crown, the British Parliament, is throwing a series of legislations to control the supremacy, to control the suzerainty of the East India Company. What they are trying to do, they are always curtailing the powers of the East India Company. But when it comes to the war, the mandate of British Crown was very clear, that we have to support our people, we have to support this private trading company in order to get our domination into the East, whether it is India or Africa. Okay. The British Parliament and Crown supported the war efforts of East India Company. There was full cooperation among the British officers and leaders like Robert Clive, Warren Hastings, Cornwallis actively participated. And I think this point is valid. This point is bitter. It may sound bitter to you, but when you compare Warren Hastings, when you compare Lord Robert Clive with Mir Qasim, with Mir Jafar, right, with people like uh, uh, Jagat Seth, they were disciplined people. And Mir Jafar, Mir Qasim, people like Jagat Seth, they did treason. They did treason. Yes, they were very good leaders, but they had something, other things in their minds. While the leaders like Clive, Hastings, and Cornwallis, they came with a clear mindset that we have to implement this policy by hook or by crook. We are the very good military leaders. If we will need a force to suppress the Indian masses, we will use it. And that was the clarity of British leadership. They were very, very clear. Right? Even during World War One, many of the British officers, many of the British advances, they defeated the Turkish because of their clarity of leadership. Of course, they had a better technology, they had better equipment than the Turkish people, but the kind of leadership they had was exceptional. And this was also adopted by Indian after the World War II and during World War II. You know the example of Sam Manekshaw. He was in the British Army during World War II, and he was molded himself completely on the British lines when it comes to the military professionalism. In terms of military professionalism, British people were much more superior than their Indian counterparts. And you can see even this kind of tradition is continuing in our armed forces as a legacy of the British Army, and there is nothing wrong in it. Leadership is something which is beyond the borders. If you are getting a very good, uh, strong leadership teachings, you must adhere it. So, people like Cornwallis and Warren Hastings were like this. There was one more military leader, and he was a great administrator also, Lord Dalhousie, who introduced the policy of doctrine of lapse. Right? Whenever you are reading or studying the modern Indian history, please study with a neutral mindset. Don't be biased. Don't be biased when it comes to the leadership of British people. Yes, they were better that time. That was the reason we got colonized. Clear? Now, divide and rule policy. This is, the least important point of this answer. The Indian subcontinent was not unified politically not unified political entity during this period, and the Indian rulers were often at odds with each other and would fight among themselves. Very easy, because the political scenario, socio-political scenario of Indians were very, very fragile. Each and every ruler was fighting in their regional supremacy. And whenever, this is the concept of modern Indian history, medieval Indian history and ancient Indian history. There are two concepts. Please keep them in mind. Whenever, first concept number one, whenever there is decentralization, this is evident from the ancient Indian history. Whenever there occurs a decentralization, which means the end of a strong central authority from any country, foreign invasion happens. After the fall of Mauryans were a very centralized system. They are a very strong centralized military, centralized administration, centralized politics. When they fall, when they were completely down and out, Indo-Greeks invaded. When Mughal Empire was shrinking during the time of Muhammad Shah, Nadir Shah invaded. When tripatriate struggle was going on for the supremacy in Kannauj in 712 AD, Arabs invaded in our country. Clear? So whenever there is decentralization, there is always a foreign invasion. And second concept is, when regionalism and nationalism struggles against each other, always nationalism wins. Take the example of revolt of 1857. British wanted to control the entire India, and that was nationalism for them. It was not the sense of Indian nationalism. It was not the sentiment of Indian nationalism that we people have, that we belongs to a common political entity that is known as India or Bharat. No, that was not the mindset of British people. The mindset of British authority was very, very clear that this is India and we have to take full control over it, and we have, for that purpose, we have to suppress this revolt by hook or by crook. But the leaders of the revolt of 1857, they were the regional leaders. Rani Lakshmibai was fighting for Jhansi, Begum Hazrat Mahal was fighting for Lucknow, Tatya Tope was fighting for his region, right? And Bahadur Shah Jafar had no idea. His commander Bakht Khan was fighting to save Delhi, and he was declared as a pseudo leader of Indian revolutionaries. So this kind of regionalism was there. The revolt was limited to North India only. Take the example of Battle of Buxar. The trio force of Indians, Mir Qasim, Shuja-ud-Dawla and Shah Alam II, were fighting for their regional supremacy. On the other hand, British were fighting for the overall supremacy, and they crushed the Indian forces like anything. So whenever regionalism and nationalism fights, always nationalism wins. Right? This is the reason we have seen a lot of wars. We have seen the war of 65, 48, 65, 71 and Kargil. Our nationalistic sentiment was higher than our Pakistani counterparts, and we won all the battles, all the wars, right? So now British always implemented a divide and rule policy. For example, the policy of subsidiary alliance. What they did, if Kingdom A is the enemy of Kingdom B, British will provide protection to both of them and rule over them. British will disband their armies, and these kingdoms will be completely devoid of to deal with their external affairs, and they will be under the instructions of political agent, which used to be appointed by the Governor General. Clear? And this was the divide and rule policy. Don't be mistaken with the Hindu-Muslim or the communal riots. This, from my point of view, this was the divide and rule policy 2.0. The origin of divide and rule policy was subsidiary alliance. They took advantage of the grudges among the Indian princely states. Clear? So the Indian subcontinent was not a unified political entity. During this period, and the Indian rulers were often at odds with each other, the East India Company was able to exploit the divisions among the Indian rulers. To its, the East India Company would ally itself with one faction and use its forces to defeat the others. For example, is the policy of subsidiary alliance. Regular employment and timely payment of salaries of the Indian sepoys made them loyal servants of the company, as they could support their families on permanent basis. What I was trying to convey you when I was giving you the introduction. British always employed Indians in their army with better perks, better economical advantages and better salary structure, while the rulers of princely state could not do this. And this was a major shift, while youth attracted towards the East India Company, and they were completely molded on the British lines, and hence British used them against the princely states. The Indian princely states were defeated by an army of company which was dominated by the Indians, and this tradition continued till the peak of 1990, the Jallianwala Bagh. A British general, General Dyer, he ordered for open fire against the Sikh on the occasion of Baisakhi at Jallianwala Bagh. But who actually fired? Who actually fired the bullets? They were the Indian soldiers. They were the British Indian soldiers. They were the Indian youth or Indian people who were employed under the British Army. Clear? So this kind of mold over on the British lines was happened throughout the generations. Clear? And salary and perks were obviously better. By the way, I am giving you the example. I am stretching the examples a lot to open your mind. Don't forget, we are discussing with respect to the context of the Indian princely states, right? Indian princely states. Okay. Next is the conclusion. Very simple. Due to the combination of military discipline, training and superior weapon and technology, these all points I have explained you in the body portion, right? The naval control and collaboration with local rulers, East India Company's army were able to consistently defeat the larger armies of Indian rulers. These factors combined to give the British East India Company a significant advantage over the Indian rulers, which allowed it to conquer much of India. So, if somebody asks you, was a superior army, a major superior army of East India Company, a well structured army of East India Company, was a reason behind the defeat of the Indian princely states in UPSC Civil Services 2025. How will you answer? You will answer in the pattern, prioritizing the points in the same manner. Clear? So this was all for the day, and for more information, kindly subscribe JobGrade IS app. Kindly subscribe the JobGrade IS YouTube channel. Kindly download the app, and for more information, for more guidance, you can enroll yourself with the Ignite Foundation batch of UPSC 2026. And what I am planning now, what I am thinking now, I will discuss more than one questions, right, within 1 hour, because the structure, you know very well what is the structuring, what are the points, what we need to do. We need to muscle up for the mains examination, and for that purpose I am planning to introduce two things. First of all, the question strategy. Another one, please let me know in the comment box, do you want a full-fledged coverage of modern Indian history by Bipin Chandra? Please let me know in the comment box. If you want that I should start this venture of Bipin Chandra, I'll definitely start it for the mains point of view. Okay, and we'll see you tomorrow at 5 p.m. sharp, and have a good day. Thank you.